The subject discussed here arises from an ancient esoteric tradition. It cannot be explored in its entirety within a single presentation. Some of its aspects may seem difficult to believe. Therefore, it is offered not as something to be proven, but as a series of ideas and accounts to be considered. People often celebrate their festivals without understanding their deeper significance. Newspapers, which serve as a principal source of education and information for many, frequently publish articles about such festivals written by authors who possess little awareness of their true meaning. Yet for those who seek spiritual understanding, it is important to look again at the inner essence of these celebrations. Attention is therefore directed to the origin of one of humanity's ancient festivals, the source of the Whitsuntide festival. Whitsuntide is among the most important festivals and also among the most difficult to comprehend. Within Christian consciousness, it commemorates the coming of the Holy Spirit. This event is described as a miracle in which the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles, enabling them to speak in many different tongues. This signifies their ability to reach every heart and communicate according to each person's understanding. Such is one interpretation of Whitsuntide. To arrive at a deeper understanding, however, it is necessary to penetrate further into the subject. As a symbolic festival, Whitsuntide is connected with profound mysteries and with the most sacred spiritual qualities of humanity, which is why it is so difficult to discuss. Only a few aspects can be touched upon here. The principle symbolized by the Whitsuntide festival, from which it derives its profound inner meaning, is said to be preserved in a single manuscript held under careful protection in the Vatican Library. Although the manuscript does not mention Whitsuntide directly, it speaks of that reality for which Whitsuntide serves only as an outer symbol. Very few people have ever seen this manuscript, unless they were initiated into the deepest secrets of the Catholic Church or were able to perceive it through spiritual vision. A copy is said to be in the possession of the Count of Saint Germain, who remains the only known source of information concerning it. From a spiritual perspective, a few indications concerning this matter lead to something intimately connected with the evolution of humanity during the fifth root race. Human beings assumed their present form during the third root race, the age of ancient Lemuria, developed it further during the fourth root race, the age of ancient Atlantis, and then advanced into the fifth root race with what had been acquired. Memories of those distant times were said to have survived among the Greeks. To understand this subject, some insight is needed into two streams within the fifth root race. These streams operate as hidden forces in human souls and frequently stand in opposition to one another. One stream is represented most clearly by the Egyptian, Indian, and Southern European outlook on life. Elements of it later entered Judaism and Christianity. Alongside this, European culture absorbed another stream, one that can be traced to ancient Persia and, when viewed more deeply than conventional scholarship allows, can be followed westward into the regions of the Teutonic peoples. Underlying these two streams are two powerful spiritual intuitions. The first was understood most clearly by the ancient rishis. They perceived beings of a higher order known as devas. Those who undergo spiritual training and investigate such matters are said to know of these beings. The devas are purely spiritual entities belonging to higher realms and possess a twofold nature, whereas humanity possesses a threefold nature. Human beings consist of body, soul, and spirit. The devas, as far as spiritual investigation can discover, consist only of soul and spirit. They may possess other aspects, but these cannot be discerned even through occult means. A deva may therefore be described as an ensouled spirit. The impulses, emotions, desires, and wishes that live invisibly within human beings, yet appear to spiritual sight as manifestations of light, form the soul nature that constitutes the inner being of humanity and is supported by the physical body. This soul nature represents the lowest aspect possessed by the devas and may be regarded as their body. The intuitive vision of ancient India was directed chiefly toward reverence for these devas. The people of India perceived them everywhere as creative powers behind the veil of outward appearances. This intuition formed a fundamental element of the worldview of the peoples of the southern regions and found particularly powerful expression in the Egyptian conception of the world. The second intuition formed the basis of ancient Persian mysticism and led to the veneration of beings known as asuras. These beings also possessed a twofold nature. They, too, had what may be called a soul, yet this soul was enclosed within a physical body developed in a grand and titanic manner. The Indian worldview, devoted to the devas, regarded the asuras as beings of a lower order. By contrast, those inclined toward the outlook of the northern peoples were drawn toward the asuras and toward physical nature itself. As a result, the northern regions developed a strong impulse toward mastering the world of the senses through material means. There arose a tendency toward organizing the realities of earthly existence through technical achievement, physical skill, and practical arts. Although direct worship of the asuras no longer exists, traces of this influence remain within many people. From it comes the inclination toward the material side of life, which became a characteristic tendency of the northern peoples. Whoever embraces a purely materialistic view of existence may be said to carry something of the asuric element within their nature. Among those who followed the path associated with the asuras, a particular mood gradually emerged. This tendency first appeared within the spiritual culture of ancient Persia. The Persians developed a certain fear of the deva nature. Whenever they encountered what belonged to a purely soul-spiritual realm, they experienced anxiety, apprehension, and dread. From this arose the striking contrast between the Persian and Indian outlooks. Things regarded by the Indians as undesirable or inferior were often revered by the Persians, while those realities held sacred by the Indians were frequently avoided by the Persians. The Persian experience of existence was permeated by a disposition that feared and rejected beings of the Deva order. Out of this worldview there arose the image later associated with Satan. Lucifer, as a being of spirit and soul, became an object of fear and suspicion. In this way the roots of belief in the devil can be traced. This mood also passed into later conceptions of the world, so that during the Middle Ages Lucifer became a figure widely feared and carefully avoided. Further details concerning these matters are said to be contained within the manuscript already mentioned. According to its account of earthly evolution, humanity became clothed in physical substance during the middle period of the third root race, the Lemurian epoch. It is considered a misconception to imagine that reincarnation has neither beginning nor end. Reincarnation began during the Lemurian age and will cease once more at the beginning of the sixth root race or age. It belongs only to a particular phase of earthly evolution. Before this period there existed a highly spiritual condition in which reincarnation was unnecessary, and in the future another spiritual state will arise in which it will again no longer be required. At the time of humanity's first incarnation during the Lemurian age, the pure human spirit, consisting of Atma, Buddhi, and Monas, sought its earliest physical embodiment. The earthly forms then developing from animal-like conditions had not yet advanced sufficiently for the complete reception of the human spirit. Nevertheless, a certain group among these evolving beings had reached a stage at which the seed of the human spirit could descend into them and begin shaping the human body. Among the individualities who incarnated at that time was a small nucleus that later spread throughout the earth as the original adepts. These were not the initiates known in later ages, but primordial adepts. Those who are called initiates in more recent times did not pass through incarnation during that early period. Not all beings capable of finding suitable human-animal bodies chose to incarnate then. Some refrained from doing so for a specific reason and postponed incarnation until the time of the fourth age. A profound and concealed reference to this appears in the biblical account. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. The incarnation of those who had waited therefore began at a later stage. This group is known as the sons of wisdom. At first glance, their decision may appear to contain an element of pride or lofty self-regard. The small group of original adepts stands apart from this consideration. Yet had these other beings incarnated during the earlier period as well, humanity would never have attained the clear consciousness it possesses today. Human beings would instead have remained in a dim, trance-like condition. Their awareness would have resembled that found in hypnotized individuals, sleepwalkers, and similar states. Humanity would have continued to exist in a dreamlike mode of consciousness. One essential element, however, would have been missing. Human beings would have lacked the sense of freedom and the capacity to judge good and evil through their own consciousness and individual ego. They would not have possessed independent moral discernment. This postponement of incarnation, viewed in connection with the fear of the devas already described, is what the book of Genesis presents as the fall of man. The devas delayed their descent into physical embodiment and entered earthly existence only when humanity had reached a more advanced stage of development. Because of this delay, they were able to unfold a more mature form of consciousness than would otherwise have been possible. The price paid for human freedom was therefore a decline into denser conditions of existence. By delaying incarnation until physical circumstances had become more material, humanity gained the possibility of freedom, but also experienced a deterioration of its original state. A profound understanding of this idea was preserved in Greek mythology. According to the Greek account, had humanity entered incarnation earlier, the intention of Zeus would have been fulfilled while mankind still dwelt in paradise. Humanity would have been made happy, but only as an unconscious being. Clear consciousness would have remained the privilege of the gods, while human beings would have possessed no sense of freedom. The revolt of the Luciferic spirit, the Deva spirit within humanity that sought to descend into earthly existence in order later to rise again through its own freedom, is symbolized in the legend of Prometheus. Yet Prometheus was required to suffer for this endeavor. An eagle, representing excessive desire, continually gnawed at his liver and subjected him to relentless torment. Humanity had thus descended more deeply into material existence, and now had to achieve through conscious and free activity what might otherwise have been attained through innate magical powers. Because this descent had taken place, suffering and struggle became unavoidable. The same truth is reflected in the biblical words, "In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread." These words express the idea that humanity must lift itself upward once more through the work of culture and civilization. In the figure of Prometheus, Greek mythology portrays free humanity striving toward culture and development. He stands as the representative of suffering mankind and at the same time as the bearer of freedom. The one who ultimately liberates Prometheus is Heracles, who is said to have undergone initiation within the Eleusinian Mysteries. Descent into the underworld was regarded as a symbolic expression for initiation. For this reason, all who undertook such a journey were considered initiates. The descent into the underworld is attributed not only to Heracles, but also to Odysseus and to other initiates who sought to guide the people of their age back to the source of primordial wisdom and toward a life rooted in the spirit. Had humanity retained the attitude that prevailed in Lemurian times, people would still live in a dreamlike condition. Through its Deva nature, humanity fertilized and transformed its lower nature. Out of self-awareness and the consciousness of freedom, human beings must now rekindle the spark that was once brought down from heaven through a justified presumption. They must awaken again the spiritual knowledge that had originally been received without personal striving during the state of unfreedom. Within human nature itself there exists that rebellious, satanic impulse which, in the form of Luciferic striving, becomes the very condition that safeguards freedom. Out of this freedom humanity is destined to wrest spiritual life once more. This spiritual life is to awaken again in the humanity of the fifth root race, the present epoch. The consciousness that arises will not be dreamy but clear and wakeful, and it will be communicated again through initiates. These Heraclean spirits, the initiated ones, are to guide humanity forward and reveal its Deva nature, its knowledge of the spirit. Such has also been the task of all the great founders of religion, to restore to humanity the spiritual knowledge that was lost through immersion in physiological existence. The fifth epoch still contains much of material life. The materialistic culture of the present age demonstrates how deeply humanity has become entangled in purely physical and physiological nature, just as Prometheus was bound in chains. Yet it is equally certain that the vulture, the symbol of craving and desire that gnaws at the liver, will eventually be driven away by spiritual human beings. This is the goal toward which the initiates seek to lead humanity through self-consciousness and through movements that aim to awaken spiritual awareness, so that human beings may rise in full freedom. The moment in which spiritual life begins to pour into the self-conscious human being is indicated in the New Testament. It is hinted at in the Gospel of John, the most profound of the Gospels, when it speaks of the Feast of the Tabernacles attended by Jesus. There the founder of Christianity speaks of the outpouring of spiritual life with which humanity was to be endowed. During that festival, the people visited a spring from which water flowed, and the celebration reminded them of their spiritual nature, their Deva striving, and their orientation toward the world of soul and spirit. The flowing water served as a symbol of that higher world. After initially declining to go, Jesus eventually appeared at the feast. On the final and greatest day of the celebration he stood and cried out, "If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink." Those who drank were celebrating a feast that recalled spiritual life to memory. Yet Jesus added something further, as the Gospel says, "He that believeth on me, as the Scripture hath said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." The text immediately explains that this referred to the Spirit, which believers were to receive, for the Holy Spirit had not yet been given because Jesus had not yet been glorified. Here the mystery of Whitsuntide is indicated. Humanity is told that it must await the coming of the Holy Spirit. When the time arrives in which human beings can kindle the spark of spiritual life within themselves, when their physiological nature becomes capable of beginning the ascent through its own forces, then the Holy Spirit will descend upon them and the age of spiritual awakening will begin. Humanity descended as far as the physical body and therefore, unlike the Devas, is constituted of three principles: spirit, soul, and body. The Devas stand at a higher stage than humanity, but they do not need to overcome physical nature in the way human beings must. Human physical nature must be transformed and transfigured so that it can receive the life of the spirit. The consciousness bound to the body, the physiological consciousness of the present age, will eventually be able to kindle the spark of spiritual existence in freedom. The sacrifice of Christ is presented as an example showing that a higher form of consciousness can unfold out of life on the physical plane. The lower individuality lives in the physical body, but it must be ignited so that the higher personality may emerge. Only then can the rivers of living water flow from the human being. Only then can the Holy Spirit appear and be poured forth upon humanity. The ego must become, in a certain sense, dead to merely physiological existence. In this lies what is understood as the truly Christian element, and here also lies the deeper mystery of the Whitsuntide festival. Human beings first live within the lower organism, within a consciousness permeated by desire. This is necessary because only such consciousness can provide awareness of the true goal, the attainment of freedom. Yet humanity is not meant to remain there. The ego must be raised to the nature of a deva. The deva within must be developed and brought to birth so that it becomes a healing spirit, a holy spirit. For this, the earthly body must be consciously sacrificed, and the process of dying and becoming must be experienced, so that the human being does not remain merely a gloomy guest upon the dark earth. Thus the Easter mystery is fully revealed only when it is understood together with the Whitsuntide mystery. The human ego, represented in its divine representative, lays aside the lower ego and dies so that it may be completely transfigured in physical nature and offered back to the Godhead. The Ascension symbolizes this process. When humanity has become transfigured in the physical body and has offered that body back to the spirit, it becomes ready to receive the outpouring of spiritual life and to experience what is called the coming of the Holy Spirit. Hence the saying, "And there are three that bear witness in earth, the spirit, the water, and the blood." Whitsuntide is understood as the outpouring of the Spirit into humanity. The highest aim of humanity is symbolically represented in the Whitsuntide festival. Its meaning points to the necessity that mankind must advance once again from a merely intellectual existence into a spiritual life. Just as Prometheus was ultimately released from his suffering through Heracles, so humanity will one day be liberated through the power of the Spirit. By descending into material existence, human beings attained self-consciousness. Through their ascent once more into the spiritual realm, they are destined to become self-aware devas. Those who followed the path of the Asuras and regarded the devas as beings of a satanic character considered this descent into the depths of earthly existence to be something dangerous and devilish. This idea is also reflected in Greek mythology. The figure whose consciousness lacks freedom, the contemplative who does not wish to attain redemption through complete freedom and therefore stands in opposition to Prometheus, is Epimetheus. Zeus presents him with Pandora's box. When it is opened, sufferings, afflictions, and misfortunes are released upon humanity. Only one gift remains behind: hope. It is the hope that in a future condition humanity too will rise to a higher and clearer consciousness. It is the hope of eventual liberation. Prometheus warns his brother against accepting this uncertain gift from Zeus, but Epimetheus disregards the warning and accepts it. The gift received by Epimetheus is therefore regarded as less valuable than the gift belonging to Prometheus. In this way, two possible paths of life are revealed before humanity. There are those who hold firmly to freedom and, although the pursuit of spirituality involves risk, seek it nevertheless through their own free striving. There are others who are content with the ordinary cycle of existence and with unquestioning belief, and who view the luciferic striving of their fellow human beings with suspicion and concern. The deeper significance of this luciferic striving has often been altered or misunderstood within the outward forms of religious doctrine. Ancient teachings concerning these matters are said to be preserved in concealed manuscripts, hidden in unknown places. Very few have ever seen them. Access to them belongs only to those capable of perceiving them through spiritual vision and to a small number of initiates. The path itself is not without danger, yet it remains the only road leading toward the exalted goal of spiritual freedom. The spirit of humanity is intended to be free rather than dull and passive. This, too, is presented as an essential aim of Christianity. The ideas of holiness, health, and healing are intimately connected. A spirit that has become holy possesses the power to heal and to free human beings from suffering and affliction. A person becomes truly healthy and free when released from bondage to a merely physiological condition of existence. Only the free spirit is genuinely healthy, for it is no longer subjected to the eagle that symbolically gnaws upon the body. Whitsuntide may therefore be understood as the symbol of the liberation of the human spirit. It stands as a great symbol of humanity's struggle for freedom and for conscious awareness of that freedom. If Easter is regarded as the festival of resurrection within nature, then Whitsuntide may be seen as the festival of the awakening human spirit into consciousness. It is the celebration of those who seek understanding, who comprehend the deeper meaning of existence, and who, inspired by that understanding, dedicate themselves to the search for freedom. The spiritual movements of modern times that seek to awaken perception of the spiritual world through clear, waking consciousness rather than through trance or hypnosis are those that can lead to an understanding of symbols such as this. Clear consciousness, which can be liberated only through the spirit itself, forms the principle that unites those engaged in spiritual striving. It is not merely words that give meaning, but the spirit living within them. The spirit that proceeds from the great masters, and that is recognized by the few who know of the existence of the great adepts who stand behind spiritual movements, flows into modern civilization and imparts to it impulses for the future. If even a spark of understanding of this Holy Spirit were to return to the often misunderstood Whitsuntide festival, the festival would regain life and meaning. Humanity seeks to live in a world that possesses significance and purpose. Whoever observes festivals without reflecting upon their meaning follows the path of Epimetheus. Human beings must become aware of the forces that connect them not only with their visible surroundings, but also with the invisible dimensions of nature. They must understand their place within existence. For humanity is not destined to remain in a dull, dreamlike, half-conscious condition, but is called to develop a free, fully conscious unfolding of its entire being. Many profound occult secrets are concealed within the story of Cain and Abel. Certain aspects of these mysteries can be indicated, though only partially, for the deeper relationship between Cain and Abel is an allegorical expression of truths of great significance. Only a limited portion of these mysteries can be approached through the concepts presently available. When the 5 books of the Pentateuch are carefully examined, numerous indications can be found concerning the development of humanity since the Lemurian epoch. The accounts of Adam and Eve and their descendants are not intended to be understood merely in a literal and simplistic manner. The Pentateuch, the writings of Enoch, the Psalms, important sections of the Gospels, the Epistle to the Hebrews, several of the epistles of Paul, and the Apocalypse are regarded as works originating from initiates. For that reason, an occult meaning must be sought within these writings. When the Bible is not read superficially, many deeper truths begin to reveal themselves. Attention may therefore be directed to something that can easily be overlooked, yet which must be taken quite seriously if it is to be recognized that nothing in the Bible is without significance. At the beginning of the 5th chapter of Genesis, it is written that this is the book of the generations of man. It states that when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, creating him as male-female and calling his name Adam. It then continues by saying that after a long span of time Adam begot a son, Seth, in his own likeness and after his own image. These words are interpreted in a very precise way. Adam is presented simply as humanity itself. Humanity is described as male-female, not yet separated into distinct sexes, and therefore still possessing an undivided nature. Humanity was created in the likeness of God. Later, however, after a long period of development, Seth appears as one begotten in the likeness of Adam. At the beginning of Adam's era, humanity bears the likeness of God. By the end of that era, humanity bears the likeness of man. Earlier, the image is divine. Later, it has become human. Humanity is therefore portrayed initially as possessing a common form and a common divine image. Propagation is understood as taking place in a non-sexual manner. All descendants retain the same essential form as their forebears. Father resembles son, and grandson resembles father. No significant differentiation exists among human beings. The question then arises, what first brought about change and differentiation within humanity? The change occurred through the involvement of 2 beings in propagation. Thereafter, descendants could resemble both father and mother, and differentiation gradually emerged. If one imagines a race originally created in the likeness of God and reproducing without sexual division, then all descendants would remain alike. No mixing or variation would occur. Differentiation first becomes evident during the period associated with Seth. Yet before the transition from Adam to Seth, 2 other significant figures appear, Cain and Abel. They stand between these stages and represent a transitional condition. Cain and Abel are understood as belonging to a time when sexuality had not yet fully developed in its later form. This interpretation is connected with the meaning attributed to their names. Abel corresponds to the concept of spirit and is associated with a distinctly feminine quality. Cain, by contrast, is associated with the masculine principle. Thus Cain and Abel are viewed as confronting one another as masculine and feminine principles. This distinction does not yet exist primarily on the physical level, but begins as a differentiation within the spiritual nature of humanity. It is therefore important to recognize that humanity is first portrayed as male-female and only later divided into distinct male and female forms. Cain is presented as the representative of the more material tendency, while Abel, and later Seth, represent the more spiritual tendency. A differentiation has taken place, and this is symbolized in the biblical statement that Abel was a keeper of sheep, while Cain was a tiller of the ground. In ancient symbolism, the ground signifies the physical plane. The physical plane encompasses the conditions of earth, water, and air. To say that Cain was a tiller of the ground means, in its deeper sense, that he learned to live consciously upon the physical plane and became a human being oriented toward earthly existence. This is presented as the masculine characteristic. It involves strength, endurance, and the ability to work upon the physical world, while still maintaining a connection to higher realms. Abel, as a keeper of sheep, represents a different principle. The shepherd accepts life as it has been given by the Creator and devotes himself to its care. He does not create the flock, but tends and preserves it. Abel therefore symbolizes the aspect of humanity that does not attain spirituality primarily through personal effort and independent understanding, but receives spiritual truth as a revelation from the divine and faithfully guards what has been entrusted to it. The keeper of flocks is the guardian of what has been placed upon the earth. Cain, by contrast, represents the one who creates and produces through his own activity. He is associated with invention, craftsmanship, and the development of culture. In the biblical account, the origins of music, represented by the playing of the zither, as well as various arts and skills, are connected with the line of Cain. Thus Cain stands as the symbol of the creative human being who brings forth new forms through personal initiative and effort. At this point, a contrast appears in the relationship of Cain and Abel to the Godhead. Abel receives from the Spirit and offers back the finest and highest fruits of that spiritual life. His offering is accepted with favor because it consists of what the divine itself has bestowed upon the earth. Cain approaches the Godhead differently. He presents the products of his own intelligence and labor. These are not direct gifts of the divine, but achievements brought forth by humanity through its own freedom. Cain therefore becomes the representative of those who strive toward the arts and sciences. At first, such pursuits stand apart from the divine source. A profound truth is expressed through this image. According to occult understanding, the arts and sciences, although they contribute to human freedom, do not in themselves lead directly to the spirit. Rather, they can draw attention away from the truly spiritual. The arts arise from the inner nature of human beings and have their roots in earthly existence. For that reason they do not immediately appeal to the divine. This creates the conflict symbolized by the offerings. The smoke of Abel's sacrifice, representing the spirit originally placed into the world by God, rises and is accepted by the divine realms, while the smoke of Cain's sacrifice is not accepted and remains bound to the earth. Whatever humanity creates independently remains connected with earthly existence, just as Cain's offering remained upon the earth. This contrast also corresponds to the distinction between the feminine and masculine principles. The feminine principle is inspired by what comes directly from the divine. Spirit is received through conception and inward receptivity. Cain's offering, by contrast, represents human work performed upon the physical plane itself. In this way, the feminine and masculine spiritual principles stand in opposition to one another. Yet the human being is not merely a physical creature. Spiritually, every person contains both masculine and feminine qualities. Humanity possesses both the capacity to receive inspiration and the capacity to work upon that inspiration through intellect and understanding. At a certain stage, these two functions became separated. From this point onward, male and female may be regarded primarily as symbols. The principle of inspiration became associated with those represented by Abel, who continued as shepherds and priests. The others devoted themselves to the pursuits of science, art, and worldly activity, directing their efforts toward earthly affairs. Such a division could not occur without a corresponding transformation in human nature. As long as humanity remained male-female in an undivided sense, no distinction could be made between spiritual wisdom and scientific knowledge. Only through a definite separation into the sexes could the human brain develop to the point at which its particular function became possible. The brain assumed a masculine character, while the deeper nature retained a feminine quality. Humanity became productive through its physical nature and thereby brought forth descendants. The spirit, insofar as it became connected with the brain, assumed a masculine character and expressed its productivity upon the physical plane. Thus Cain and Abel stand as representative types of two distinct forms of consciousness and thought. As a result of this separation, human propagation changed. Offspring no longer appeared merely as identical repetitions of their parents, but began to show variation and differentiation. The greater the significance attached to sexual distinction, the more pronounced these differences became. If propagation had remained entirely asexual, each generation would have resembled the preceding one without meaningful variation. Diversity became possible only through mixture. This mixture arose because the masculine principle committed itself more deeply to earthly existence. Cain became the tiller of the soil and transformed the earth through his activity. The outward differences that subsequently appeared among human generations would not have emerged had a portion of humanity not descended more fully onto the physical plane. Previously, propagation had proceeded from higher realms. Now something new entered human nature because humanity drew elements from the physical earth itself. Human beings began to bear the likeness of what they had acquired upon the physical plane and carried these characteristics onward into higher stages of existence. The physical became the distinguishing mark of Cain. The influence of the physical plane upon humanity is symbolized as the mark set upon Cain. Humanity now became fully united with the earth, and a contrast emerged between Cain and Abel, between the sons of God and the sons of the physical plane. The Abel-Seth line represented the sons of God, while the Cain line represented those whose destiny was bound to earthly existence. In this light, it becomes understandable why the story of Cain and Abel is placed between Adam and Seth. A new principle entered human evolution, the principle of heredity. Original sin is understood here as the condition in which each generation becomes different from the one that preceded it. Yet some of the sons of God still remained. The line associated with Abel was not completely extinguished. A significant change is then revealed in the biblical account, when asked, "Where is Abel thy brother?" Cain responds, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Such a statement could not have been made in earlier times. It becomes possible only when consciousness develops in a way that is separated from direct spiritual unity. At this point, the principle of struggle is added to the principle of love. Opposition enters existence, and with it the birth of egoism. The words, "Am I my brother's keeper?" express this new condition. Those who remained within the Abel line continued as sons of God and retained their kinship with the divine. They therefore sought to protect themselves from excessive involvement in earthly affairs. Out of this tendency developed what later became the principle of asceticism among those dedicated to the service of God. For such individuals, close association with those wholly committed to earthly concerns came to be regarded as a transgression. Thus it was considered a grave error when the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair and took wives from among them, choosing their companions from the daughters of Cain, and thereby entering more deeply into the sphere of earthly existence. From this union there arose a race that is only faintly alluded to in the commonly available books of the Old Testament and is never described directly. It was said to belong to a realm not perceptible to ordinary physical sight. In occult terminology, these beings were called Rakshasas and were considered similar in nature to the Asuras known in Indian tradition. They were described as demonic beings that once genuinely existed and exerted a seductive influence upon humanity, contributing to its decline. According to this interpretation, the union of the sons of God with the daughters of men brought forth a race that exercised a particularly powerful influence upon the Turanians, the members of the fourth subrace of Atlantean humanity. Their influence was said to have contributed to the destruction of that civilization. Nevertheless, certain elements survived and were carried over into the world that followed. The deluge was understood as the great flood that destroyed Atlantis, while those who had fallen under the influence of the Rakshasas gradually disappeared. At this point, a teaching is introduced that is often regarded as extraordinary. For many centuries, it remained an occult mystery concealed from the outer world and has appeared unbelievable to many, yet it has been maintained within occult tradition as a reality. Those who investigated such matters through what is called the Akashic Record repeatedly affirmed its truth. According to this view, the Rakshasas were actual beings that worked actively as tempters and seducers of humanity. Their influence upon human desires continued until the time when Christ entered earthly existence through Jesus of Nazareth, and the Buddhi principle itself became present within a human body. This event is regarded as possessing significance that extends far beyond the earthly sphere. For that reason, the biblical statement that Christ descended into the regions of hell is interpreted in a special way. It is held that Christ did not encounter human souls there alone, but also spiritual beings. Through this encounter, the Rakshasa beings were brought into a condition of paralysis and inactivity. At the same time, they were restrained and rendered incapable of continuing their former activity. This could occur only because two natures were united within Jesus of Nazareth. On the one hand, there was the ancient Chela nature, deeply connected with the physical plane and therefore capable of acting effectively within that sphere and holding it in balance. On the other hand, there was Christ himself, a purely spiritual being. This union is presented as one of the central occult mysteries underlying Christianity. In the invisible realms, a decisive event took place: the banishment of forces regarded as enemies of humanity. This event is echoed in the legend of the Antichrist, who is described as being bound in chains but destined to appear again unless opposed once more by the original power of the Christian principle. Much of the occult striving of the Middle Ages was directed toward counteracting the influence of the Rakshasas. Those whose perception extended into higher realms were said to foresee that a significant turning point might occur at the close of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Nostradamus, who worked from a tower open to the heavens and became known for assisting during the Great Plague, was regarded as one who possessed prophetic insight. He composed a series of prophetic verses containing references to future events, including the War of 1870 and several predictions concerning Marie Antoinette that were believed to have been fulfilled. Within the collection known as the Centuries appears a prophecy stating that at the end of the 19th century, a brother of Hermes would come from Asia and bring unity to humanity. This prophecy was interpreted as finding its fulfillment in the Theosophical Society. The overcoming of the Rakshasas and the restoration of the primordial mysteries were regarded as central aims of that movement. It was also taught that Jesus Christ remained connected with the earth for 10 years after his death. The Pistis Sophia was considered to contain some of the deepest theosophical teachings and was regarded as more profound than many later esoteric writings. Jesus was believed to have incarnated repeatedly, and his mission was understood as the renewal of the ancient mystery wisdom. This was viewed not merely as a matter of historical or cultural significance, but as part of the continuing struggle against the Rakshasas, a struggle regarded as a profound and important occult reality. A question naturally arises as to why such teachings were communicated through allegories rather than presented openly. The explanation offered is that the great teachers of humanity, Moses, the Indian rishis, Hermes, Christ, and the earliest Christian teachers, accepted the reality of reincarnation. Their symbolic and allegorical method of instruction, therefore, had a specific purpose. When, for example, a Druid priest spoke of Niflheim, Yma the giant, and similar figures, these were not intended merely as poetic legends. Rather, the teacher believed that truths conveyed in the form of myths and stories would prepare the soul, through future reincarnations, to understand those truths more fully when the time was right. According to this view, such stories arose not from mere faith, but from knowledge founded upon the experience of reincarnation itself. Even the later denial of reincarnation, beginning around the 3rd century after Christ, is interpreted as having been undertaken with reincarnation still in mind. It was considered necessary that humanity become more deeply involved in earthly existence, so that spiritual life would be concentrated within a single incarnation. For this reason, Christianity was said to have remained without an open teaching of reincarnation for approximately 1500 years. To continue withholding this knowledge beyond that period would, according to this perspective, amount to denying humanity an important truth for a second time. Such a denial would be regarded as a serious wrong against human development. Yet the first concealment was considered necessary because humanity first had to learn to recognize the value and significance of the single life lived between birth and death. Many of the great stories of the Middle Ages, including those of Parsifal, the Round Table, and Hartmann von Au, contain mystical truths expressed in an esoteric form, although they are generally understood only in their outward sense. To discover their true origin, one must look back to a period preceding the spread of Christianity. Elements that later became interwoven with Christianity had already been living within the spiritual traditions of regions such as Ireland and Scotland. Tracing these influences further leads to a particular center from which this spiritual life was disseminated throughout Europe. The spiritual culture of Europe was said to have radiated from a mother lodge in Scandinavia known as Drott's Lodge. The name Druids was associated with the oak tree, and for this reason the Germanic peoples were traditionally said to receive their instruction beneath the shelter of oaks. The Drotts, or Druids, were regarded as the ancient initiates of the Germanic world. Their presence is said to have continued in England even into Elizabethan times. Everything preserved in the Edda and in the ancient Germanic sagas ultimately points back to the temples and teachings of the Drotts or Druids. The creators and transmitters of these tales were initiates. The sagas therefore contain not only symbolic and allegorical meanings, but also references to actual experiences of initiation. An example can be found in the saga of Baldur. Baldur is portrayed as the hope of the gods and is slain by Loki through a branch of mistletoe. Thus the god of light is killed. Beneath this narrative lies a profound mystery that all who underwent initiation were required not merely to study, but to experience directly. Within the mysteries, one stage of initiation was known as the search for the body of Baldur. It was assumed that Baldur remained eternally alive. This search represented a complete illumination regarding the nature of the human being. Baldur symbolized the human being who had become lost to his original condition. In a distant past, humanity was not as it is today. Human beings were undifferentiated, not burdened by passionate experiences, and were composed of a finer and more delicate substance. Baldur represented this radiant human being. When symbols are properly understood, they must always be interpreted in a higher sense. The human being who has not descended into what is now called matter is symbolized by Baldur. This higher being lives within every person. The Druid priest was required to search within himself for this higher self and to understand where the division between the higher and lower natures had taken place. The central secret of all initiation was the birth of the higher human being within oneself. What the initiate achieved in a comparatively short time, the rest of humanity was destined to accomplish gradually through long stages of evolution. In order to become guides and leaders of humanity, the Druids had to undergo this initiation. Humanity, having descended into denser conditions of existence, was required to overcome matter and regain its former higher state. This birth of the higher human being was accomplished in a similar manner throughout all the mysteries. The human being submerged in material existence had to be awakened once more. To achieve this, a series of genuine experiences was required, experiences entirely unlike anything encountered through the ordinary senses on the physical plane. The stages of initiation followed a definite order. The first step led the candidate before what was called the throne of necessity. There the initiate stood before an abyss and directly experienced within his own being what lived in the lower kingdoms of nature. Humanity contains within itself both the mineral and plant kingdoms. Modern human beings are generally unable to experience what these elemental aspects undergo, yet much of what is enduring and constraining in existence arises from the fact that humanity shares in the nature of mineral and plant life. The next stage brought the initiate into contact with everything living within the animal kingdom. Passions, desires, and impulses appeared as swirling and interwoven movements. The candidate was required to observe these realities so that perception could awaken to what lies hidden behind the veil of the senses. Ordinarily, human beings are unaware that forces moving within astral space stand concealed behind the physical covering. The veil of Maya functions as a sheath that must be penetrated by the initiate. When these coverings fall away, true vision becomes possible. This is a decisive moment, for the priest realizes that the sheaths had restrained impulses that would otherwise have broken forth with overwhelming force. The third stage led to a perception of the elemental forces of nature. Without preparation, this experience is difficult to comprehend. The initiate becomes aware that immense occult powers dwell within these forces, and that elemental passions express themselves through them. Through this realization, the initiate encounters powers whose magnitude far exceeds anything experienced as personal suffering. The following trial was known as the handing over of the serpent by the Hierophant. Its significance can best be understood through the effects it produces. The meaning is reflected in the saga of Tantalus. The privilege of participating in the council of the gods can be misused. This experience raises the human being above ordinary existence, yet it also carries dangers that are vividly expressed in the story of the curse of Tantalus. Ordinarily, human beings regard themselves as powerless before the laws of nature. Such thoughts belong to a mode of thinking that remains merely a shadow of true thought. Thinking of this kind is incapable of accomplishing anything creative. Productive thinking, however, is a living force that builds and shapes realities. In such thinking, passive reflection is replaced by thought permeated with spiritual power. The discarded skin of a caterpillar is an empty sheath, but when filled with living activity, it becomes the living caterpillar. In the same way, active spiritual force is poured into the empty sheaths of thought. Through this transformation, the priest gains the ability not only to behold the world through vision, but also to work within it through magical power. Yet with such power comes a great danger, for it always carries the possibility of abuse. At this stage of development, the occultist acquires a particular power through which he becomes capable of deceiving even higher beings. It is no longer sufficient merely to repeat truths that have been received from others. He must experience them directly and develop the ability to determine for himself whether something is true or false. This stage is known as the handing over of the serpent by the Hierophant. On the spiritual level, this process corresponds to what the earliest stages in the formation of the spinal cord signify on the physical level. In the evolution of the animal kingdom, development proceeds through forms such as fishes and amphibians until it culminates in the brain of vertebrates and of humanity. In a similar way, there exists a spiritual backbone that determines whether a spiritual brain can develop. At this stage, the human being undergoes that process. He is lifted out of coma, the realm of feelings, passions, and desires, and is endowed with a spiritual backbone through which he can ascend into the spiraling structure of the spiritual brain. Just as the physical brain possesses its convolutions, so the spiritual world contains corresponding windings. These are symbolized by the labyrinth. The initiate gains entry into this labyrinth and into the winding pathways of the spiritual realm. After this, he was required to take an oath of silence. A naked sword was presented before him, and he was obliged to swear a solemn and binding oath. Through this oath, he pledged that he would remain silent concerning his experiences whenever speaking to those who had not undergone the same initiation. The true content of these mysteries cannot be communicated without preparation. Yet the initiate was able to shape these truths into sagas and narratives that became expressions of eternal realities. Whoever possessed the ability to speak in this manner held great influence over other human beings. The creator of such a saga impressed something enduring upon the human spirit. Ordinary words are eventually forgotten, and only the faintest trace survives death. Eternal truths, however, remain far longer. Much of ordinary scientific thinking leaves little behind after death, but truths connected with the eternal persist and reappear in a new incarnation. The Druid priest spoke from higher planes of existence. His words were often simple, yet because they expressed higher truths, they sank deeply into the souls of his listeners. He addressed ordinary people, but the truths entered their inner being and became part of them. What was thus implanted would arise again in a future incarnation. In those times, people experienced truth through fairy tales and sagas. Human spiritual bodies were prepared through these stories, and the ability to comprehend higher truths in later times arose because of that earlier preparation. This period of spiritual activity, which came to an end around 60 years after Christ, prepared the spiritual life of Europe and created the foundation upon which Christianity could later build. These teachings were preserved, and those who seek diligently may still find access to what was once taught within these lodges. After taking the oath upon the sword, the Druid had to drink a special draught from a human skull. The meaning of this act was that he had transcended the merely human condition. He was required to develop a particular attitude toward his lower bodily nature. Everything living within his body had to be regarded with the same objective and detached feeling with which he would regard any vessel or container. Only then was he initiated into higher secrets and shown the path leading into higher worlds. Thereafter he was led into a vast palace whose roof was formed of shining shields. There he encountered a being who cast forth 7 flowers. In these experiences were revealed the mysteries of cosmic space, the cherubim, and the demiurge, the maker of the world. Through this process, he became a true priest of the sun. Many people read the Edda without realizing that it contains descriptions of experiences that actually belonged to the ancient Drot's mysteries. The priests of the Drots possessed immense powers, extending even over life and death. Yet, as happens with many things through time, corruption gradually entered. What had once been among the highest and holiest realities eventually degenerated. By the period in which Christianity was spreading, much of the original purity had been lost, and many practitioners had become black magicians. Christianity therefore appeared as a force of redemption. The study of these ancient truths is capable of providing an almost complete overview of the whole field of occultism. The construction of a Druid temple differed greatly from modern methods. Not a single stone was placed upon another without exact astronomical measurement. The positions of doorways and other structural features were determined according to precise astronomical calculations. The Druid priests were regarded as builders of humanity itself. A faint reflection of this tradition survives today in certain ideas preserved within Freemasonry. The first initiation consisted in learning to penetrate astral substance and to behold the sun at midnight. The second initiation was the handing over of the serpent by the Hierophant. The third initiation was the journey into the labyrinth. A closely related subject now arises, one that may at first appear somewhat distant from that theme. Yet through it, a deeper understanding of human development becomes possible. The sagas of different peoples contain profound meanings, and myths are expressions of deep esoteric truths. Among the most remarkable of these sagas is one that concerns the entire evolution of the 5th great epoch. At the same time, it illustrates how a student of spiritual science advances through different stages in the understanding of myths and legends. At first, a saga lives within a people and is understood in its outward, literal sense. Later, doubt arises concerning this interpretation, and scholars begin searching for symbolic meanings hidden beneath the surface. Beyond these approaches, however, further levels of interpretation exist. Every saga can be understood in 7 different ways. The third level once again permits a certain literal understanding, though a knowledge of the language of myths is necessary before this becomes possible. One of the most difficult examples is the saga of Prometheus. The Prometheus story belongs to the world of Greek mythology. Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus were sons of the Titan Iapetus. The Titans themselves were the children of the most ancient Greek deities, Uranus and Gaia. Uranus signifies the heavens, while Gaia signifies the earth. It is noteworthy that the Greek Uranus corresponds to the Indian Varuna. Prometheus and Epimetheus therefore belong to the lineage of the Titans and descend from Uranus and Gaia. Among the Titans, the youngest was Kronos, or Time. He seized power from his father Uranus, but was later overthrown by his own son Zeus. Kronos and the other Titans were cast into Tartarus, the underworld. Only Prometheus and Epimetheus remained loyal to Zeus. They joined his side and fought against the other Titans. Zeus, however, became determined to destroy the human race, which he regarded as having become arrogant. Prometheus took the side of humanity. He sought a means by which human beings could preserve themselves and become less dependent upon the help of Zeus. For this reason he bestowed upon humanity writing, the arts, and above all the use of fire. Through these gifts he incurred the anger of Zeus. As punishment, he was chained to the Caucasus, where he endured prolonged suffering and torment. The saga further recounts how the gods, under the leadership of Zeus, commanded Hephaestus, the divine smith, to fashion a female figure. This figure was endowed with all the outward characteristics of humanity belonging to the fifth great epoch. She was Pandora. Pandora was sent to bring gifts to humankind, particularly to Prometheus, the brother of Prometheus. Prometheus warned his brother not to accept these gifts. Nevertheless, Prometheus allowed himself to be persuaded and received them. The contents of Pandora's gift were then released upon humanity. Most of them consisted of suffering, afflictions, and misfortunes. Only one thing remained behind within the vessel: hope. Meanwhile, Prometheus remained bound to the Caucasus. A vulture continually fed upon his liver, prolonging his agony. Yet even in his suffering, he possessed knowledge of a secret that was hidden from Zeus. Zeus greatly desired to learn this secret, but Prometheus refused to reveal it. Even when Hermes, the messenger of the gods, was sent to question him, he remained silent. The saga then tells of Prometheus's extraordinary liberation. His release could only be accomplished through the intervention of an initiate. This initiate was Heracles, the Greek hero who carried out the 12 labors. These labors symbolize the tests that must be undergone by one seeking initiation. It is also said that Heracles himself received initiation in the Eleusinian Mysteries. Because of this, he possessed the power to free Prometheus. Yet another sacrifice was necessary. The centaur Chiron offered himself in Prometheus's place. Chiron, who was both man and beast, suffered from an incurable injury. Through his death, Prometheus was released. Such is the outer narrative of the Prometheus saga. Within this story is concealed the entire history of the fifth great epoch, together with genuine mystery wisdom. In ancient Greece it was told openly as a saga, but within the mysteries it was presented in such a way that the candidate for initiation stood inwardly before the destiny of Prometheus himself. Through this experience, he was enabled to behold both the past and the future of the fifth great epoch. A true understanding of the saga depends upon recognizing a particular fact. It was only during the middle of the Lemurian epoch that human incarnation came into existence in the sense in which human beings are born upon the earth today. Humanity at that time stood under the guidance of exalted teachers and leaders known as the Sons of Fire Mist. Humanity of the present fifth great epoch is likewise guided by great initiates. Yet the initiates who lead humanity today differ in nature from those ancient guides who directed human evolution during those distant epochs. A clear distinction must be made between the leaders of the earlier root races and the leaders of the present fifth root race. The guides of those former root races also belonged to a white brotherhood, but they had not undergone their previous development on Earth. Their evolution had taken place on other worlds, and they came down to Earth already possessing a high degree of maturity and wisdom. Their task was to instruct the young humanity of that time in the original arts and capacities necessary for its development. This period of guidance extended throughout the third and fourth root races and continued into the fifth epoch. The fifth great epoch began with a small group of human beings who had been selected from the preceding great epoch. They were gathered together and prepared in the Gobi Desert, from where they spread out across the world. The first great leader of this movement was one of the Manus, the Manu of the fifth root race. He still belonged to that company of exalted leaders who had descended to Earth during the time of the third root race. His development had not been confined to Earth, for he arrived already possessing a fully matured state of consciousness and wisdom. Only during the fifth root race did the development begin of Manus who were akin to humanity itself, beings who had risen from among mankind. Thus there existed both highly advanced masters and leaders of humanity, and those striving toward such attainment. Within the fifth root race were Chelus and Masters, who had passed through all the experiences available to human beings since the middle of the Lemurian epoch. One of these great masters was destined to assume leadership of the sixth root race. That future epoch would be the first to receive as its Monu a being who was truly a brother of earthly humanity. The older leaders, who had come from other worlds, would then hand over their guidance to one who had emerged from humanity itself. The rise of the arts coincided with the beginning of the fifth root race. The Atlantean human being lived in a completely different manner and did not invent or discover things as people do today. His activities followed other principles. Everything connected with technical science and the arts in the modern sense arose only during the fifth root race. Among all discoveries, the most significant was the use of fire. Nearly every aspect of technology, industry, and art depends upon it. Without fire, the achievements of modern civilization would scarcely be possible. Therefore, the mastery of fire may be regarded as the fundamental discovery that gave rise to all subsequent inventions. At the time when the Prometheus saga was formed, the concept of fire embraced everything related to warmth. Lightning and all natural processes connected with heat were also included within this idea. The awareness that humanity of the fifth root race stood under the sign of fire found expression in the figure of Prometheus. Prometheus himself represents the entire fifth great epoch. As we already mentioned earlier, Prometheus has a brother, Epimetheus. The names themselves reveal their significance. Prometheus is the one who thinks beforehand, while Epimetheus is the one who reflects afterward. These two figures embody two forms of human thought. Epimetheus represents the individual who allows events and experiences to affect him, and only afterward considers their meaning. This is a form of consciousness bound to earthly experience and intellectual reflection. Humanity of the fifth root race generally thinks in this Epimethean manner. Prometheus, however, represents another capacity. Whenever a person does not merely react to circumstances but creates something new for the future, becoming an inventor or discoverer, that person acts in the spirit of Prometheus. No invention could ever arise if humanity consisted only of Epimethean thinkers. Every invention begins as a thought that exists before the thing itself and is then transformed into reality. This is Promethean thinking. It is the thinking of spiritual ideas within the fifth root race. Earthly thought and spiritual thought exist side by side during this epoch, but spiritual thinking is destined to become increasingly widespread. This monist thinking of the fifth root race possesses a distinctive character that becomes clearer when compared with the Atlantean epoch. Atlantean thought was more instinctive and remained closely united with the forces of life itself. The people of Atlantis could draw upon the energy contained within seeds and use it as a motive force. Just as modern humanity draws power from coal to generate steam and move machines, Atlantean humanity utilized the living forces hidden within plant seeds to propel vehicles and accomplish practical tasks. This ability has disappeared. The spiritual capacities of the Atlanteans enabled them to work directly with living nature and employ the latent energies contained within it. The spiritual powers of the fifth root race, however, are chiefly capable of mastering the forces of the inorganic mineral world. Thus the monus of the present great epoch is linked with mineral forces in the same way that Atlantean humanity was linked with the powers of life. All Promethean powers are therefore bound to the rock, to the solid earth. For this reason, the Apostle Peter is called the rock upon which Christ established his church. The symbolism is the same as that of the rock of the Caucasus. Humanity of the fifth epoch must seek its destiny upon the physical plane and is bound to the forces of the inorganic mineral realm. The significance of the technology of the fifth epoch becomes clearer when viewed as a whole. However remarkable and powerful the achievements produced by intellect and monus may be when applied to the inorganic mineral world, the primary impulse behind most discoveries and inventions remains self-interest and egoism. From the earliest inventions to the most modern developments, such as the telephone, immense forces have been placed at humanity's disposal. Yet the question arises, For what purpose are these powers mainly employed? Railways and steamships transport necessities and goods from distant regions. Through the telephone, people arrange for the satisfaction of their daily needs. At their foundation, many of these inventions serve human desires, wants, and cravings. Recognizing this objectively reveals how the higher human being, placed within physical existence, remains bound to matter during the fifth epoch because the astral body continually seeks fulfillment within the material world. From an esoteric perspective, the various principles of human nature stand in definite relation to particular organs of the body. These relationships reveal important aspects of human development. The physical principle is occultly connected with the upper region of the face, especially the root of the nose. Humanity was originally astral in nature before becoming incorporated into physical existence. The physical organization first established itself in this region and then extended outward. For this reason, the occultist associates the mineral physical principle with that part of the human form. The second principle, prana, or the etheric counterpart of the body, is related to the liver. An occult connection exists between the life forces and this organ. The third principle, the astral body or coma, expresses its activity through the digestive system, centered in the stomach. The particular structure of the digestive organs is a result of the distinctive nature of the astral body within humanity. When the human being is viewed through the physical body, the etheric body, and the astral body, the foundation becomes visible of that aspect of humanity which remains bound by the mineral chains characteristic of the fifth great epoch. Through the higher principles, however, humanity gradually frees itself from these limitations and rises toward higher worlds. Coma Monas, within which the ego becomes active, strives upward once more. Through it, humanity begins to release itself from the purely physical basis provided by nature. Because of this, an occult relationship exists between this principle and the umbilical cord. Without the activity of this principle, the embryo would not become separated from the mother's body in the manner necessary for independent existence. Higher Monas, or spirit self, is connected occultly with the heart and the circulation of the blood. Buddhi, or life spirit, is related to the larynx and the organs of speech and swallowing. Atma, or spirit man, is connected with that element which permeates the whole human being, the akasha, the immortal aspect of existence. These are the 7 occult correspondences. Among them, the relationships involving the etheric and astral principles are especially significant for the present epoch. When this is considered together with the Atlantean capacity to work directly with life forces, the difference between the two stages of humanity becomes apparent. Atlantean humanity still possessed an intimate connection between its etheric body and the etheric forces of the surrounding world. Through its own etheric nature, it could influence and direct the prana or life energies present in nature. As humanity advanced to a higher stage, its field of activity shifted downward. This reflects an occult law. Every advance is accompanied by a corresponding descent in another respect. Formerly, humanity worked upon the astral plane through etheric forces. In the present epoch, its task is to work upon the physical plane through astral forces. This relationship is profoundly expressed in the saga of Prometheus. The vulture that continually gnaws at the liver symbolizes astrality. It represents the force that consumes the energies of the fifth epoch. By attacking the liver, the seat of the life forces, it portrays how the energies characteristic of the fifth root race draw upon and exhaust the vitality of humanity. Prometheus is chained to the rock, just as humanity is bound to mineral nature, to the petrine rock, the Caucasus. This condition is the price humanity pays for its Promethean destiny. Yet through this very struggle, humanity is called upon to master its own nature. The goal is to overcome bondage to the mineral world and no longer remain chained to the Caucasus. Only initiates who have attained the consciousness proper to the fifth epoch can assist in liberating humanity from these bonds. Heracles, as such an initiate, had to make his way to the Caucasus in order to free Prometheus. In this manner, the initiates raise humanity above its fetters, while whatever belongs to a passing stage of evolution must ultimately offer itself up in sacrifice. The human being who still remained closely connected with the animal aspect of his nature was represented by the centaur Chiron, and this older form of humanity had to be sacrificed. The human being of earlier epochs had to yield so that a new stage of development could emerge. The sacrifice of Chiron was therefore just as essential for the advancement of the fifth epoch as the liberation brought about through the initiate. It was said that within the Greek mystery schools people were given insight into the future. This was not presented as a vague or abstract prophecy of coming events, but as guidance showing the path humanity would need to follow. Individuals were shown what must be accomplished for future development, and the powers still waiting to unfold within humanity were portrayed in the great mystery drama of Prometheus. The three generations of gods, Uranus, Kronos, and Zeus, were to be understood as successive great leaders of humanity. Uranus represented the heavens, while Gaia represented the earth. Looking back beyond the middle of the Lemurian epoch, humanity did not yet exist in its present form. Occult science described an original human being known as Adam Kadmon, still undivided and asexual, who had not yet truly belonged to the earth. This being had not developed organs suited to physical perception and remained united with the heavenly realm of Uranus. Through the union of Uranus and Gaia, humanity came into existence as an earthly being and thereby entered the stream of time. Kronos, or Time, became the leader of the second divine generation, guiding humanity from the middle of the Lemurian epoch until the beginning of Atlantis. The Greeks expressed these successive stages through the figures of Uranus, then Kronos, and finally Zeus. Zeus, however, belonged to those leaders whose development had taken place beyond the earth itself. He was one of the great immortals, like the other Greek gods. During the fifth great epoch, mortal humanity was required to learn to stand upon its own foundations. Prometheus became its representative. He was the bringer of the arts and, above all, the giver of the primal art of using fire. Zeus opposed him because humanity was destined to produce initiates from within its own ranks, initiates who would eventually assume leadership in the sixth epoch. Yet humanity first had to pay a price for this destiny. For that reason, the first great initiate of mankind had to take upon himself the burden of suffering. Prometheus stands as the archetypal initiate of the fifth epoch, one who experienced initiation not only as knowledge but also as action. He underwent the full measure of suffering and remains bound until liberated by those who gradually become capable of freeing humanity itself and raising it beyond its attachment to the mineral world. In this way, the sagas present profound cosmic truths. For this reason it was said that whoever reaches the third stage of interpretation can once again understand such stories literally. In the saga of Prometheus, the image of the vulture gnawing at the liver is not merely symbolic. It is to be understood in a literal occult sense. The vulture truly gnaws at the liver of the people of the fifth epoch. It depicts the ongoing conflict between the forces associated with the stomach and those connected with the liver. This Promethean struggle is repeated within every individual belonging to the fifth epoch. The description can therefore be understood quite literally. Without this struggle, the destiny of humanity in the present age would be entirely different. There are therefore three ways of interpreting the ancient sagas. The first is the outward and literal understanding. The second is the allegorical interpretation, in which the story represents conflicts and processes within human nature. The third is the occult understanding, where the narrative once more becomes literal, though on a deeper level. From this, it becomes evident that all significant sagas originate in the mystery schools. They are representations of what was enacted there as the great drama of human destiny. Just as the saga of Baldur reflected experiences that formed part of the Druidic Mysteries, so the saga of Prometheus portrayed experiences undergone by candidates for initiation within the inner sanctuaries of the Greek mystery schools. Through these experiences they received the strength, insight, and renewed energy necessary for the future course of life.